This week on Aliens Explored, we will be looking at the life and times of former US Army intelligence officer Philip J. Corso. Some 50-odd years after the event, and shortly before his death, retired Lieutenant Colonel Corso published The Day After Roswell, an expose of the US government's alleged cover-up of the whole saga, in which he alleges that many of the technological innovations we enjoy to this day have been reverse-engineered from that crashed flying saucer. This episode of Aliens Explored is dedicated to Toby Fomes, our Explorer of the Week.
Aliens Explored is a weekly podcast exploring famous and obscure cases of UFO sightings, alien abductions and other strange events from both a believing and a sceptical perspective, whilst keeping an open mind. I'm Stu Jackson, a professional actor and amateur ufologist with a particular interest in the crop circle phenomenon. I'll be debating that otherworldly visitations are real. The truth is out there.
And I'm Neil Kelly. I'm a professional actor as well and used to work for the military as an intelligence analyst. I'll be arguing from a more doubtful point of view. I mean, it's all a bit far-fetched, isn't it?
Welcome back, listeners, to Aliens Explored, your weekly podcast where we look at ufology, UAPs, ETs, EBEs, and all manner of different kinds of people involved in it all. I am one of your hosts, Stu Jackson.
And I am one of your hosts, Neil Kelly.
Hello, Neil. How's it going?
Oh, very well, thank you, Stu. Very well. How are you?
Not bad, not bad. Do you know what? Actually, I can hear it in our voices. We're less ebullient. Is that's a word, isn't it? Less ebullient.
Effervescent, yeah.
Less effervescent than normal.
We're not bubbly and...
I know I certainly am. And that's because we have... We'll dive straight into this because it's important information. Mm-hmm. We have a bit of news for our listeners. Now, many of our listeners will be aware that currently we have ongoing a crowdfunder for the Crop Circle documentary that we are going to be making next year. That remains unaffected by this news. However, Neil and I have been discussing, have we not, Neil?
We have.
We're both getting very, very busy with our careers. And, of course, Aliens Explored, the intention was, we started during lockdown, of course, and that was the idea was a fun thing to do during lockdown, which it certainly was.
Yeah, I mean, certainly had the time, and we couldn't go anywhere else.
That's it. But now we're finding we don't quite have the time that we had before. So we've taken. It's been quite a difficult discussion and decision, but we are going to be taking a bit of a break from Aliens Explored for a while. Aren't we, Neil?
Not with immediate effect.
No.
We didn't just come on to say, well, that's it. We're done. We're giving you notice.
We are indeed giving you notice. So there's this episode. There is going to be next week's episode, and then after that, we plan to do a final. So this would be basically episode 116, a kind of wrap up chat. So not about any specific topic, but more just a kind of wrap up session, as one does. Now we have been saying off air between ourselves very clearly with each other, we're not saying forever. The hope is to come back to this, but likewise, we're not going to put a date on it, are we, Neil?
We're not what? Sorry.
We're not going to put a date on it to come back.
No. I mean, I suppose for actors, it's nice to be busy. It's some might say it's unusual to be busy in the long term, but we've both got things ongoing or coming up, which is nice because it means we're earning a living.
That's it. But, we can't predict the future.
No, and of course, it's not just finding time to do it. It's finding time when we've both got time to do it, and that's what is becoming difficult now.
Yeah, it's matching time, and from my end as well, it's the editing side of it. It's quite an involved thing doing a podcast, as we've both learned over the last couple of years.
Yeah.
Because totally new to it. So there we go. Now, of course, our Patreon that we have running, our Patreon members might be curious to know how that's going to be affected. Obviously, that will be coming to an end along with the episode. So the last month that the Patreon will run is October. So if you wanted any special items, get in quick. You haven't got long. In fact, no, actually, if you signed up now, it wouldn't come out until November. So you're too late. That's it. Yes, no more new Patreons. So there we go. But yeah,
this all seems to have come to us a halt very quickly, doesn't it? So these little deaths.
That.
Yeah,
it feels like that a little bit, but it's not coming to an immediate halt because we do have certainly today's topic to discuss, which is a man very, very interesting and connected, of course, with that big old ufology event, Roswell.
Yes.
We're going to be talking about Philip J. Corso. Now, a big question I often ask on the show, Neil, had you heard of him beforehand?
No, I had to look him up.
Okay. Were you, when you looked him up, were you surprised you'd not heard of him before?
I don't think so. I think you'd have to be quite into the whole Roswell thing and have looked into it in some detail and been au fait with all the different personalities involved. I don't know how peripheral his involvement was in this. He was an Army intelligence officer.
Like yourself.
Yeah, I think he's a bit more so, sort of longer lasting and higher ranking. He was and probably perhaps more wide ranging.
He was a lieutenant colonel, wasn't he, in the US Army?
Yes. Yeah.
He's one of those names. I think within ufology circles, or within certain circles within ufology, he's a name that kind of everybody knows. The moment you step outside of ufology, nobody's ever heard of him. So, because we all live in our little echo chambers, of course, people like me were shocked when people haven't heard of him. How can you not have heard of him? He wrote a book blowing the lid off the whole thing. And of course, people outside ufology are like, who? So to give any of our listeners who perhaps haven't heard of him, so we've mentioned he was in the US Army, Lieutenant Colonel. He actually served in the US Army for 21 years from 1942. That's long service.
No, that's a normal. In the British Army, the standard term of service is 22 years for other ranks. For NCOs, you would from age of 18, you'd serve until they wouldn't let you serve more than 22 years. So if you join at 19 or 20, obviously you serve to 41 or 42 years old. But generally, your service starts from age 18. And even if you join the army younger, the British Armed Forces are unique in developed nations in that we still recruit child soldiers. So we've got 16, 17-year-olds joining, but their service doesn't start until they're 18. and then they will do 22 years, and then there would have to be a special reason for them staying on beyond that. A lot of them do. A lot of them, especially, they join the army as children. They don't know anything else, and the wider world seems a cold and unfriendly place, and they just want to stay where they're comfortable. But generally, it's only if they've got some sort of speciality or some there have to be special circumstances that allow them to stay on. Officers tend to retire about age 55.
Right.
And of course, all this is dependent upon how you progress through the ranks. If you're 30 years old and a private soldier, they're probably, and you go to renew your contract, they're probably going to say, actually, I think we should part ways.
Yeah.
When times are good, when they're not desperate for anyone they can get.
I mean, my perception has always been, people spend about 5 years in the army and that's about it. But no, I mean, when you're saying it like that, it makes sense. And of course, I can see how certainly people who joined young would want to stay in the army because, like I say, the outside world seems like a cold and unfeeling place. And of course, these people have been programmed to see civilians as the enemy.
The civilians that they're supposed to defend, yes, they are beneath them. They have contempt for them. They're taught to be contemptuous of civilians.
And then, of course, leaving the army would make them civilians.
Yes. Yeah, and I was amazed. I saw it in the army myself that there was a guy coming up for retirement, and he was just in denial. He was thinking, shouldn't you be doing this and shouldn't you be doing that? And no. He just didn't want to talk about it. And then so he had a nervous breakdown when the time came. He just ended up on a psych ward, and that happens a lot. Psychologically
helped by civilians cars. They're the only ones who are going to help you when you come out. I'm very jaded about that whole thing. Anyway, let's move on. We've digressed hugely there.
He served a normal term of, he joined the army in 1942, so I guess a lot of people joined the US Army in 1942 because there was some stuff going on that needed to be done. But then, I guess like a lot of soldiers decided to stay on, went into the Korean War in the early 50s and stayed in until, was it 21 years you say? So 1961?
1963.
1963, sorry, I can't count. Yeah. That would be 19 years. 1963. So obviously he was around Roswell was right after World War II, wasn't it? 1947.
It was. But some 34 years after he's come out of the military service, he releases a book, co-authored with William J. Burns, called The Day After Roswell, where he talks about his role in particular in looking after alien artifacts recovered from the crash. Really very, very interesting. And he goes at great lengths in this book to talk about this and to talk about it at length and how this technology was basically reverse engineered and introduced into civilian life. And it's from this reverse engineered technology that we have accelerated particle beam devices, fiber optics, integrated circuits, and even Kevlar.
And lasers.
That would be accelerated particle beam devices.
Okay.
That's, all
right.
Same thing.
All right. I'm just reading from the list.
Yeah.
So now, all of these things are attributed to human inventors who had nothing to do with Roswell, aren't they?
As they would be.
As they would be, yeah. They're not going to say we... Yeah, but what I'm saying is that they didn't all come out of the US military. They came from other places and other countries. Let's have a look.
Did they come from other countries? That's an interesting claim. Outside of the military, definitely. But then if you're... it's often been claimed that a lot of the sort of black budget UFO stuff that the military have done have been done through third-party big corporations. Because if they say to you, okay, you're an aviation specialist corporate company, we're going to get you involved in this. Yes, you'll get to keep all the copyrights and patents and what have you in exchange for understanding this stuff for us. Yeah, that sounds like a good relationship to me. But you get the same for individuals as well.
Well, I think that there's always a tendency to claim an invention for yourself. I think in Britain we're taught that television was invented by John Logie Baird, a Scotsman. I think in America they're taught it was someone else. Certainly in North Korea they're taught that it was Kim Il Sung or someone like that. The dear leader who invented television. I think the Chinese are told that it was a Chinese invention. So that notwithstanding, I mean, I don't think we're as bad as some of these authoritarian dictatorships in claiming that, yes, it was our glorious leader who invented whatever technology has suddenly become available to you that was available to everyone else years ago.
I think most countries are pretty jingoistic in that regard. I remember when I was 16 years old and I was out visiting family in Australia, and my uncle, who is not Australian, but kind of felt he had to justify his moving out to Australia and shipping his family out there. He was talking about cat's eyes in the road out in Australia, and because when he left the UK, they didn't exist. So he was in Australia when they were, we got these amazing things, these cat's eyes in the road. They're absolutely brilliant. Invented by an Australian, No, they weren't. No. Believe it was a bloke in Norwich who invented them.
I think it was, and it's amazing because I remember, being, from I don't remember a time when there weren't cat's eyes on the road in Britain. For our foreign listeners, cat's eyes are these little fluorescent lumps in the middle of the road.
The lumps of glass. Just reflect the light of your headlights.
Yeah, so you can actually see the road snaking ahead. And, until I remember when I first drove in Europe, when I drove in Germany and Holland, places like that, and they didn't have anything like that. It was really quite disconcerting. Yeah, you realise the value of them when they're not there all of a sudden.
I remember as a kid taking the cat's eyes out of the road to use them as marbles or something similar.
Oh, really? You dug them out?
Yeah. I was a young kid. So this concept that each country claims they've invented it, that there's nothing new or unusual about that.
No. But the idea that these technologies are reverse engineered off-planet technology, extraterrestrial technology.
Yes. Yes, and
that whoever might have claimed to have invented it in whatever country, whether in Germany or, people were doing experiments with the conductivity of glass back in the 19th century, weren't they? For transmitting light, it was only in the 1980s or 90s that it suddenly became a medium for actually transmitting data as light rather than as magnetic pulses.
So there is, you can definitely see there is a leap in technology, and certainly, integrated circuits, integrated circuit chips in particular, absolutely, that was a quantum leap in technology. Were it not for those, we wouldn't have pretty much any of the technology we have today. We'd still be like working with valves.
Yeah.
Which are, so we wouldn't have mobile phone technology. We wouldn't have the satellite technology that we have. We wouldn't, it's
I remember,
hard to imagine a world without it all now.
Something more familiar to our American listeners than elsewhere is a cartoon character called Dick Tracy. He's in the funny papers in the comic pages of American newspapers, and these dated back from I think the 1930s. But I remember Dick Tracy had a wrist radio It's like a big watch with an antenna coming out.
Yes.
And it'll be going in the cartoon, it'll be this sort of lightning bolt signs will be saying, calling Dick Tracy, calling Dick Tracy. And people said, that's impossible. You can't make a radio that size, because in those days, a radio was actually a piece of furniture. It required valves. You could not fit valves into something that would strap to your wrist, the size of a wristwatch. And that's because they were thinking only in terms of the technology of the time. It's an argument why you should pay more attention to science fiction writers. Not disregard science writers, but scientists will look at something from the perspective of what they think is possible based on the technology that they understand. Whereas a science fiction writer was just going to say, well, I don't know how it works, but I'm just going to say that he's got one. And it does. Yeah, imagine you can have that. And of course, a wrist radio is nothing special today. It would be regarded as rather quaint.
Well, I'm going to say that the really good science fiction writers will come up with ways for them to have worked that might involve technology that we don't have yet. And Star Trek's the perfect example of that, because everything is explained how it all works. It's one of the things I love about it with the world building. But I always it won't surprise any of our listeners who might know that I'm a devout Trekkie, that I use Star Trek as the example with that. When that came out in the 60s, people looked at it and laughed at the idea of doors that open automatically when you walk up to them. That'll never happen in my lifetime, people said. Now go to any supermarket or, it's just an accepted part. So absolutely. So there has been... this for me, this argues a case in favour of what he's saying here, because all these things that we take for granted were an absolute quantum leap in technology.
Although, when Philip J. Corso wrote his book, which was, when was it published? 1997. So all these things that he's talking about were well established by this time. All these inventions. Does he mention any that are still being worked on?
So I'm going to hold my hand here. I have not read the book myself.
No, I haven't read the book. But it's funny. He's saying, all these things that we're used to now, they're reverse engineered alien technology. Well, surely the extraterrestrials, their technology went a bit further, because obviously we can't travel between dimensions or intergalactically or whatever, which they can do. Obviously, there's some more technology there that obviously we haven't been able to harness. If that's... He doesn't mention anything that's we haven't got to grips with.
There is...
Or does he?
Well, I'm going to suggest probably not, but I think for a very good reason, because... there is a school of thought that says that reverse engineering any foreign technology depends on it having some basis of similarity to what you've already got technologically. So take integrated circuit chips as a perfect example. We had something similar at the time in the terms of valves. Now, obviously, chips were way more advanced than that.
No, and with transistors in between.
But it gives you a grounding in understanding what it is you're looking at. Now, if you were to show a valve to someone from medieval times, they wouldn't know what to make of it. They wouldn't begin to know how to understand it, because they haven't got anything even vaguely similar. So I'm going to say, there's probably technology out there. There's probably technology from that crash that is just totally beyond our understanding, because we don't have anything similar.
I think a good example would be if you tried to dissect a fly to find out how it worked. And you're trying to look at all the miniature mechanics and everything, and when you open it up, all that's in there is goo.
Yeah.
Well, how does that work? How does that...
Exactly. exactly, and it might work perfectly well.
Yeah, we know that a fly flies, but you can't take one apart and work it out how it functions.
Yeah. Yeah, we'd have to understand, well, hang on, where's its lungs? Where's its digestive system? Where's its this, that, and the other? Where's its brain? Yeah, assuming that it would have to have those things. Yeah, that's a really good analogy. So, yeah, I would say there are going to be technologies out there that we just don't understand. That are just too foreign, too alien for us. Now, Corso does go further than just talking about reverse-engineered technology in his book. He also claims that the Strategic Defense Initiative, Star Wars, you remember that, was designed specifically to counter alien technology.
That's not what I remember.
No, that was not the public. And again, I'm going to say, well, no, they're not going to say that publicly, are they? And he did say in this book that we are at war with this alien species.
We are at war with them?
Yes.
Okay. And they'd be beating us hands down if we weren't so far away.
Well, this is
where they can get to us, but we can't get to them.
This is where I start to. So everything Corso claims in his book up to this point, I can see and I can get on board with and I can accept. Saying that we are in an active conflict with these beings, I really struggle with, because if we were, they'd have won. Yeah.
I mean, he's a military man, and so he will see things through a certain lens, in a certain light. Military people, their interest in UFOs is to, well, they're concerned with air defense.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest worries about UFOs is that it's not something from another dimension or another planet, but it's a terrestrial enemy that has suddenly developed technology that enables them to enter your airspace with impunity. That suddenly the Russians have got planes you can't shoot down that can outperform anything you got, or the Chinese have got something. That's what military people are worried about. And the Strategic Defense Initiative was really about, certainly the way it was put at the time, was it's going to be a missile shield. And this was a dangerous time. Remember, this is the 1980s, and Ronald Reagan was in the White House, and the talk started to get crazy because for generations, or a couple of generations, we talked about nuclear deterrence as mutually assured destruction. No one would be mad enough to start a nuclear war because we'd all just get killed. That's when they started talking about a winnable nuclear war and how we can shoot down Russian missiles before they get to us, whereas ours will be able to get through to them. And one of the things that came out of the SDI was the Patriot missile system, which became so famous in, I think it was the first Gulf War, wasn't it? That they had this system. We can shoot down Saddam Hussein's Scud missiles, or we can intercept them. But that was based on a very, very broad understanding of what intercept means. There was a Scud missile that landed on a US base and killed a large number of US personnel. Well, that missile had already been, in inverted commas, intercepted by a Patriot missile. Because you imagine these things are flying at thousands of miles an hour. So you've got the Scud missile coming towards you at thousands of miles an hour. You send up a Patriot missile, and at some point, as it gets near, the Patriot missile has to explode to destroy the Scud. And if it's not close enough, it might knock it off course, or it might do nothing. Well, apparently Patriot had already been fired at this thing, and they ticked it off. They said, "Yep, that's been successfully intercepted," even though the Scud missile still hit its target and killed dozens of US service people. So, but what they were interested in was selling this Patriot missile system to customers around the world. It was You know, all our wars are marketing operations. Say, look, we've got this technology. How do you fancy buying this?
Welcome to a capitalist society.
Yeah, that's what we do.
Yeah.
So the Patriot, we haven't heard much about. I suppose Patriot missile systems are probably a bit old hat now.
Well, yeah, got to be 30 years old.
Yeah, but I mean, there was talk of space-based weapon systems. I know there was a satellite with a nuclear device in it and a sort of series of lenses. So they would detonate the device, which would destroy the satellite. But in the split second before the blast blew it to pieces, the nuclear flash would be focused down these lenses and create a deadly beam that could take out a missile.
Yes.
They invented rail guns, which it's basically an electromagnet, and it will accelerate anything that's dropped into it. So it will basically fire rounds at a phenomenal rate from a satellite to targets on Earth. You know, we're seeing this kind of this technology.
We are. And how much of that has come from Roswell? That's the big question. So there is a final twist in this tale. So yeah, I do struggle with Corso's claim that we are at war, unless, and I can see two possibilities. One is, as I think you were alluding to, as a military man, he sees everything as a threat. I can see
a potential threat. Yeah,
I can see that. But also, I mean, there is the other possibility. It's quite sort of commonly accepted in ufology. There isn't just one alien species visiting the planet. There are, I think it was about 57 people have counted.
Okay.
And there may be others protecting us.
But you know, even in more recent times, when Donald Trump talked about his space force, I understood that, and I'm sure I wasn't the only one who understood that. As though we're talking about the militarization of space,
yes,
to fight wars on Earth against terrestrial enemies. But I remember there was General Ashed, is it Jaime Ashed, the Israeli general and chief scientist, who claimed that Donald Trump had made contact with was it the Galactic Alliance or something?
Yes, he was the Israeli defense minister.
Yeah, he was a general.
We did talk about him in an episode.
We did, yeah. I mean, he was a general and a scientist, but he suddenly came down saying, you know, Donald Trump's making. So if Philip J. Corso is saying we have enemies from other planets, Jaime Ashed is saying we have potential allies from other planets.
Yes. Episode 25. If you
episode
go 25. Back and listen, listeners.
Yeah.
Episode 25, that one. Yeah. So I can see that as a possibility as well. But I do struggle with the idea that there's this alien civilization out to wipe us out or enslave us or whatever. Because I think, if that it would have happened. We'd already be in that situation. But hey, I might be wrong. But there is a further and final twist to the tale with Philip J. Corso. So we've said 34 years after he left the military, he publishes this book, this whistleblowing account of Roswell, or rather of the technology taken from the ship that he was responsible for, that he looked after. And then a year later, he dies of, and I'll do air quotes, a heart attack.
How old was
he? A year
he?
after whistleblowing. Yep. He passed away of a heart attack on July the 16th, 1998.
1998. So, yeah, born in 1915. So, 15 from 98. He was the kind of age where, you know, a death of a heart attack wouldn't be too much of a surprise.
It wouldn't.
He wasn't like a young fit man suddenly dropping dead.
No, but within a year of publishing this whistleblowing book, I find that suspicious.
I'd have found it more suspicious if he'd suddenly dropped dead while he was trying to find a publisher for his book, and that his book had disappeared. But then we wouldn't know about it, would we? So
we wouldn't know about it.
So if the security services decide to take him out, well, yeah, horse, stable door, bolted, words like that come to mind.
Yes, but it also prevents him from being questioned more deeply about events. It prevents him from being pressurized into providing proof of his claims, and it's much, much easier to dismiss him as a result of it. So you'll remember we talked about Phil Schneider.
Yeah.
Who met a sticky end.
I mean, the long gap between completing his military service and writing this book about this aspect of it, was it 34 years? I mean, he might have just been a slow writer. He might have, not occurred to him to write. Or maybe there was some statute of limitations. They said, well, you can't write about this until this much in the future. So 1997, that's 50 years. 50 years exactly after Roswell. Okay, we're putting a 50-year law on this.
Maybe someone dropped the ball and put an actual 50-year clause in when they should have put it as an indefinite one.
Yeah, I think America tends to be a bit freer with that sort of information than Britain does. I mean, Britain does have 100-year rules, eternal. This must never be known.
America claims. But if they're keeping it secret, how would you know?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there are some things they're secretive about, but I remember when I was in the military. If a soldier asked, soldiers weren't allowed to see their medical records. British soldiers weren't, and if a soldier got posted to another unit, I would have to get their medical records and seal them in a series of envelopes with seals on, so they couldn't be broken. So they would just take them with them. So when they arrived at their new unit, they'd hand them over to the medical centre. These are my medical records that they're not allowed to see. If an American on the base said, I want to see my medical records, I just had to hand them over.
Yeah.
They're yours, yeah.
Yeah.
There's quite a difference. Then working in intelligence, I came across documents which in Britain were classified top secret or secret, in this case Canadian, it was just regarded as restricted. It wasn't, which is a very low. The what's for dinner in the canteen today is restricted. Is that sort of level of information?
Yeah.
So we've made a big state secret of it that we'll put you in prison for, or send the SAS around to stab you for.
Well, that's the big question with Corso. Is that basically what happened to him? So we've reached that time in the show. Neil, Philip J. Corso, was he telling the truth? Was he delusional? I mean, he had a very successful, very distinguished career.
He did, yeah, as a military man. I haven't read the book, so I would have to.
I mean, we know his claims. It's not. It's not a secret. We've covered the basic claims that he's made.
Yeah, I also do wonder about reverse engineering alien technology. That we would take something, if we were doing it, that we'd take something fairly benign from a spacecraft and try and turn it into a weapon. That would be, it's the military who have the money. That's what.
Of course, we would
do with anything, wouldn't we? And I can imagine we would use the technology to create something much cruder than had come from the alien craft. An example, I suppose, would be if a B-1 bomber crashed on a remote Pacific island, the natives there will be able to take one of the very complex weapons and build a basic powder and ball musket out of it. That kind of, they're using the bits, they're using the parts, and they're using the components, but they're making something much more primitive.
You'd have to understand it first, though. That's the thing, or at least understand the physics surrounding it, and that comes back to what I was saying. Like we can understand integrated circuit chips coming off an alien spacecraft because we've got valves, we've got something comparable.
I can also imagine someone starts tampering with something they don't understand. They say, well, let's see what's inside this box. They'll get the screwdriver out, and it goes bang and kills them. And someone else looking on says, that gives me an idea for a new weapon.
Yeah, could well be.
Yeah, apparently a lot of people get injured or even killed trying to take airbags out of cars.
Yes.
They're explosive.
Having worked at the Honda production facility where they make the cars, and having had to carry airbags, very careful how you carry them because they do contain explosives. Anyway, I'll give you my view on Philip J. Corso. I think he's absolutely telling the truth. I think the whole the aliens at war with us. Do you know what? I gave my theories about that earlier in the show. I've actually just thought of another one, which is maybe that's what he was told.
Yeah.
It might not be true, but maybe that's what he was told. So anyway, that's, I think, what is going on there. And I think I can see the possibility that he was killed to be silenced as well.
Soldiers have to be told who the enemy is, don't they? They can't. When they say that wars happen when governments tell us who the enemy is, revolutions happen when we work it out for ourselves.
But what do you think, listeners, about Philip J. Corso, not about revolutions? Although tell us what you think about that as well. You can contact us via the usual means. You can contact us on Facebook and Twitter by searching Aliens Explored. You can email us, aliensexplored@gmail.com. And we will be keeping these lines open whilst we are on our, let's call it a sabbatical, shall we, Neil?
Let's call it a sabbatical.
While we're on our sabbatical. So do contact us. And of course, our Patreon members, those who've signed up to it, will keep having access to our Patreon Discord server. That will be continuing in perpetuity as well. Join us next week, though, when we will have our final topic episode, and we'll be bringing it right up to date with some recent UFOs that have been seen by scientists in the Ukraine. And that was proposed by Neil.
It was, yeah. Occasionally I come up with something.
Occasionally you do, and that's an absolute cracker that you found there. So really looking forward to getting my teeth into that one. So join us for that, our penultimate episode and our final topic episode. That's quite sad.
Yeah.
Let's end on a positive note. What's positive? Halloween's coming.
We've got jobs.
We've got jobs. Yay.
We're not going to starve or freeze in our hovels this winter like half the population of the country.
Politics, right. We need to end this episode now before we go down that rabbit hole. In the meantime, keep watching all the different podcasts and channels out there dedicated to ufology. And of course, keep watching the skies. Take care for now.
Bye-bye.
Aliens Explored is a Figo Films production in association with Juicy Falls. Music by Darren Mafucci and editing by Stu Jackson. Find us on Twitter and Facebook by searching Aliens Explored or visit aliensexplored.com.